All right, let's make a responsive website. This thing is a little bit flashy with all the pink and yellow, but please bear with the design. So what we're going to be doing here is we've got our standard website, and it's got a number of different sections. We have this sort of hero image here. We've got these calls to action with some sales. We have a responsive navigation that's happening. We've got your standard columns with your features. We got like about or featured taco spot here, and then like a little spot for your Instagrams at the bottom. And as I resize this, well, first of all, the menu is going to move from being right here to when you get maybe it's sort of mobile size, it's going to move up top. We're going to be able to open and close that with a little bit of JavaScript. And then as you get smaller, you'll see that these features right here will automatically resize themselves, but the top value here is going to rearrange itself to sort of 1 by 2, and then eventually we're going to put those 2 underneath, and then at a certain point everything will go down to 1 column because we're sort of on mobile for that value. So let's get started here. Open up this responsive. We've got all the different sections here. So we've got top, we got menu, we got features, we've got about, and we have gallery. So those are sort of the 5 pieces that are all direct descendants of this wrapper element here. And then if we open up responsive start, this is where we're working right here. I also have responsive start.css, and this doesn't have much in it. We do have that base styling, which gives us this background, but I've just bumped up the font size. I've styled the button already, and I put a max width on our images so that they don't spill outside of any of our containers that we have. Good. So let's start from top down. We'll start with the top section. And I also want you to open up your dev tools just so we can see exactly what's going on here. So I'm going to go to layout. There's no grids yet, but if we display grid on this sucker, it's going to show up, and we'll turn that on. And I want them to look a little bit something like this. Now, instead of actually defining the columns here, I'm going to use grid template areas where we can name them. And that's going to be really handy when we get to responsive, because we can just rearrange the actual grid. So let's say grid template areas, and I want them to be, it's going to look like this: hero, CTA1. And then the next one is hero, CTA2. And that should put them sort of side by side. Hero is going to take up 2 heights, and the CTA1 and CTA2 are going to take up their value. So it doesn't look great here. That's because we need to go ahead and select them now. So the hero is just going to be grid area hero. And there we go. So it's starting to look a little nicer. And these will automatically fall into place, but let's explicitly place them. So CTA1 is going to be the grid area CTA1. And obviously the next one's going to be 2. Good. And it won't change anything, but we can see them showing up. Let's go and style this hero value that we have here. So we'll select that hero. Actually, did we already select it? We did right here. So we're going to put a min height on it of 400 px. Beautiful. We're going to put a background on it of white, and we're going to use a URL images / taco.jpg. Looking good. Background size cover. Beautiful. We'll background position it into the bottom right. So sort of anchor it off of that taco. So if we get a lot bigger, that taco image is going to anchor itself in the bottom right-hand corner. And we'll put a little bit of padding on that as well. Beautiful. Now let's work with these this text here. I want to get it to look like this, where it's actually in the middle to the right. And I had initially done this with grid, but this is actually a perfect use case for Flexbox. So let me show you here. Let's first grab those hero items, and we'll put a background color, which is a yellow. Good. And the design I want is I just want them to be as wide as the text is, right? But the problem is that they are grid items. They're not inside of like a wrapper. They are themselves grid items. So if we look at the HTML here, you'll see that our grid is our grid would be the hero. We would display grid on that. And then the H1 and the paragraph tag are going to be our grid item. So let's actually try to do that. So let's go back to our hero, and we'll say display grid. and we justify content center. That will actually start. Beautiful. And align content center. That puts them right where I want them. The problem is that because it's column based, if we take it off the top and turn on the header, the columns are just going to be as wide as the longest one. And I want this yellow to stop exactly right here. And that's just how it works. One column is always going to be as wide as the other. So this is a perfect use case. Instead of using grid, we're going to display flex on that item. We're going to say flex direction column. So they go top to bottom. And we would say justify items center. No, let me take these off. I really don't know what they do. I just try align items center. No, align items start or flex start, and justify items center. No, justify content center. There we go. That's exactly what I want. I put a little bit of padding, 5px on those. Beautiful. That's exactly what we want. That's a good use case for using Flexbox over CSS Grid when you want each of them to be a variable width. Now let's go on to these call to action values here. So say anything with a class of call to action on it. Background is going to be that yellow that we like to use. Beautiful. Put a little bit of on our top value. We'll put a grid gap of 20px on it so they're not butting up totally against each other. Now I want to perfectly center all of the text right inside of here. So we'll go back down to our CTA and we'll display grid right on those. So we'll say align items center and justify items center. And that will center them for us. Alternatively, we could just said place items center center. And there's a little bit of, let's turn on the grid for one of these. You see that they are stretching to whatever the height is. And in this value, I want them to be suctioned into the actual middle. So for that, we are going to justify content, or no, sorry, align content center, and that will put them right in the middle. There is a little bit of margin on them, so say CTAP margin 0, and that will get rid of them. See how I like to have them just right bang in the middle, regardless of how high the value is available to us. So that's a good use case for that. I'm going to take the price. So sorry, I'll put this down here. Anything with a class of price, font size 60px. Beautiful. And then we'll just put font weight of 300 on that. Good. That's looking good. That whole top value is done for us. Let's move on to doing the navigation. So we'll go ahead and select the menu UL. And we want all of these items here, the taco, beer, wine, dessert, we want them to take up as much space as they can. And that's a good use for our min-max. So we'll say grid template columns, repeat, auto fit, min-max. We want the minimum to be 100 pixels, the maximum to be 1 FR. So let's see where that gets us. Nowhere, because I did not display grid on that. Awesome, looking good. We can take off all of the padding, margin, and we can say list style none, and that will get rid of the dots that we have there. And then instead of styling the LIs, we're actually going to style the links. So we'll say dot menu A, background, the yellow value that we like. Now, what's going on with each of these? Why are they not spreading all the way across? Well, display block on those links and they'll go all the way across, because by default links are inline and they just go as wide as they need to be, but we want them to be block and they will take up all the space we have. Text decoration none, padding 10px, text align center, color, that black color that we like to use. Looking pretty good. Maybe text transform uppercase. I like it. Bump up the font size a little bit as well. Good. So that is all of our values there. We'll go back up to this grid and say, we'll put some gap on it, maybe 10px. Looking good. And we'll also put some margin on the top of each, and top and bottom of it. All right, tacos, beers, wines, dessert. I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's while we're focused on this, let's hide this menu button. So I'm just gonna go over to my inspector here, go over to the rules. And I'm actually using ARIA attributes here to hide and show the button rather than a bunch of classes. So ARIA controls menu list. We're just going to totally hide that button. And then we're going to control the open and state close with this ARIA expanded attribute. So go down here and we'll say ARIA controls menu list. That's an attribute selector in CSS. So based on the attribute being ARIA controls menu list, display none. And that will then hide it. Then we'll come back to that when we hit our media queries in order to show it and move this up top and a bunch of other stuff. Good. Let's move over to the features section here. And inside of the feature, we have a bunch of features. So features is going to be display grid. And then the grid template columns is going to be, let's do our whole repeat, auto fit, min, max, minimum of 200 px, maximum of 1 fr. Let's give that save. See, looking good. Let's actually style each feature and then we can see if it's actually responsive. So feature, background, let's just do white for now. We'll come back to that in a second. Padding, 10 px, border, 1 px, solid white, and text align center, and box shadow 004 px, RGBA 0000.1. Looking good. We'll go back up to our features and put some gap on that. Grid gap 20 px. Now, this should be responsive by nature because we've used this auto fit min max deal that we like to use. So as I resize, as I get smaller, there we go. It goes all the way down to one column. We can play with these icons as well. So feature icon, font size 50 px, and it's looking good to me. Maybe we'll make this text a little bit gray. Good, that's looking good to me. Let's move on to this about section, which has the featured taco. About, background white, padding 50 px. We'll make it a display grid. And I want this image to be 400 pixels wide, and then the rest of the text, the rest of the space will be reserved for the text. So let's do the first column 400 pixels and the rest 1 fr. And that should put everything right side by side. Now I want to vertically center everything. So align items, center, and that will vertically center everything else. I could also horizontally center it, but because of how this works, it wouldn't do any different. That's looking pretty good. It's just bumped up a bit. So I'll say margin 0. Actually, we know what we can do. Instead of having to put margin on every single one of these things, if I go to my menu, you know how I put margin on that as well? All of this stuff is all bumping up against each other. What we can do is we can make our wrapper. Let's go above the top and select our wrapper. And that's going to be display grid. We're not going to actually put any columns in it, but what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to do something like grid gap 20 px. And then every single one of the items, if we look at our DOM here, the DOM, this is our wrapper. We have top, we have menu, we have features, we have about, and we have gallery. All of those items are now going to be spaced 20 px apart. I don't have to worry about doing margin top or margin bottom on any of these items. This is also going to allow us to use the order property to put the menu above the top section when we hit a certain breakpoint. So let's finish up the rest of the site down here. We did the about. Let's look at the instant grams. So we'll go to the bottom here. Gallery. I want to display grid on the gallery itself, and I want them to be 200 pixels minimum, 1 fr maximum. So let's say display grid template columns, repeat, auto fit. See how we use this a lot in the real world? Auto, 1 fr. 200 pixels, 1 fr. Looking good-ish. So what I did to to show you what's going to have each and every one of them be a different photo. Is I actually made them all a little bit different sizes. They start at 201 and go up to 210. So now that's looking kind of funky. So we have to do a little bit of CSS to slightly adjust those. So grid gap 20px on each of those. And we'll say gallery image width 100%. That's looking a little bit nicer for us, but I want this H2 to go all the way across. You see how the H2 is going to be a grid item as if the gallery is the grid. So what we're going to do is we're going to select that H2 and make it span all the way across. Start at 1, go to the end. Bam, looking good. But let's do this pretty snazzy. Look at this Instagram snazzy. Scroll in and scroll out. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make this H2. Let's actually move this below the image for my sanity's sake. Oh my gosh. I turn off my auto formatting because it screws up the grid template areas. And then when I screw up the rest of it, I'm all goofed up. So we have this H2, which is a grid item, but we'll also display grid on that. Now you might be saying, Wes, what are the grid items on an H2? Well, we're actually going to be using a before and after attribute for these yellow bars that go to the right and to the left. And what's neat is that before and after, they are considered grid items just along with the actual content inside of the H2. So we're going to make some items that go to the left and to the right of this H2 tag here. So we'll say gallery H2 before and gallery H2 after. We will display block on them. Content set to nothing, so they're actually items. Height of 10px, and the background, let's just do a background of yellow for now. We're going to change it to a gradient in just a second. So I've got these bars. These are before and after bars that show up. If I were to inspect element, you'll see that my H2 has a before, a text, and an after. And these three things are going to be our grid items. Now I want the text to be in the middle, and then I want the before and after to split whatever is left. So we can go to this H2 and we can say grid template columns 1fr auto 1fr, and that will immediately just put them right next to each other. Now that's kind of butting up a little bit close, so we can use some grid gap for that. Looking good. And then if I want to vertically center them, we use align items, and that will put them to the left and to the right. Now I want them to be gradients, not just background color. So we'll say background linear gradient, and I would say to left, and then our variable yellow, and we want it to go to transparent. So the way that gradients work is that you tell it the direction, what you want to start at, and what you want to stop at. You can put multiple stops in there, but this is just a very simple start, stop, figure it out in between, and that will put it from left to right. Now the problem is that the after needs to be flipped around. It needs to be to right. So what I could do is just select that again and just duplicate it, and then change that left to right, and we could call it a day. But what is also cool about this is we could change this to be a variable var, and we could make a direction variable and fall back to the default left if it's not there. And let me remove this. So that's back where we were. And then on the after, all we have to do is just set that variable direction to be right. And then it will flip that value because it will overwrite it. It comes after this. And we've got this nice little thing. You can also do this pretty simply in Flexbox as well. But it doesn't really matter all that much. All right, let's start working on some of the responsive stuff. So we'll do it top to bottom. We'll start with this top section here, where if you remember, we did hero hero call to action 1, hero hero call to action 2. And what I want to do is as we get smaller, I want to put the $1.99 and $3.99 underneath it and let this this picture span all the way across. So we'll go down to the bottom here. Give ourselves a media query. So we'll do max width 700 pixels. I'll say the top value, and all we have to do here is just redefine what the layout looks like. So we'll say grid template areas, and the value is going to simply be hero, hero, and CTA1 and CTA2. And because the values are already assigned to hero area, CTA1 area, and CTA2 area, they should just automatically change them up. So we'll go over to our inspector here. And as I resize, let's actually turn on the grid inspector for CTA1, CTA2. And as we hit that value, they go below each other, and we just relay out what that value looks like. We'll do one more, just copy paste this media query. And when we hit 500 pixels, we're just going to bring it down to one column. And all we need to do now is just say hero, and then the next line CTA1, and the next line CTA2. That should do it. There we go. Looking really good. It's still currently scrolling horizontal because of some other stuff that we have on the page. That will be fixed as we go through the website. So that's good. Let's go on to the next one, which is the responsive menu. The first thing I actually want to do is once we hit 1,000 pixel media query, we're going to move the menu above the actual top thing that we have here. So I'm going to duplicate this media query, and we're going to switch it to 1,000 pixels. And I'm going to take the menu and I say order -1. And what that should do is, because menu is a direct descendant of our wrapper, and because our wrapper is already display gridded, by putting it order -1, and there it is, it put it above the actual top instead of in between. So we've reordered the actual values that we have there. At that point, we also want to show the button. So what was the button that we had earlier? It was the ARIA controls menu list. So I'm going to grab that selector, paste that in there. We're going to display block and put some margin bottom on the bottom there. So that's our menu that we have showing up. Now, because this is my mobile value, I want to hide the actual UL. So the way I'm going to do that is to select the menu, .menu, UL. I'm going to say max height 0. And the reason why this will become apparent why I'm doing this in just a second. And I'm going to transform it by rotating X 90 degrees. And what that actually does is it hides the menu for us. It has just rotated it up. And I'm going to show you how when we click this button in just a second, it's going to hide and show the different values that we want. I'm also going to put a transition on it of 0.5 seconds. Transition all 0.5 seconds. Then we need to go to this button and inspect it. And when it's clicked, I need the ARIA expanded to be set to true or to false, so back and forth. So we're going to write a little bit of JavaScript to do that. I initially had done it with a checkbox hack, but I found out that the checkbox hack was not accessible. So we're going to do it with some JavaScript, which is more accessible. So we'll go down to our script here, and we'll grab that nav button. So we'll say const nav button is equal to document.query selector all, and we're going to select it based on it's a button with an ARIA-expanded attribute on it. Then we're going to make a function called toggle nav. And just say console log toggle. And then we'll listen for a click on that nav button. So we'll say nav button.add event listener. I'm going to listen for a click. And when that click happens, we're going to toggle the nav. So if I go to my console here, I click this button. Oh, I screwed it up. Add event listener, capital L. There we go. Nope. And still not a problem. And that is because I query selected all. I just need query selector. We don't want a node list. We want just one node, the first one that it finds. There we go. Now when I click it, I get toggle is running a number of times. Good. Now inside of this toggle nav, we are going to destructure the target. Let's try console log the target, see what we got. The target is the button itself. It's the thing that was clicked. And now what we want to do is get the aria expanded attribute. So we'll say const expanded equals target. That's the button itself. Dot get attribute aria expanded, and we want to see if it is a string of true. So console log expanded and see what value we got. So it's currently false, but it actually doesn't return a Boolean. It returns a string of false. So we have to do this little funky thing where we check if the value is triple equals to a string of true. Otherwise, we're going to fall back to a Boolean of false. And then we console log expanded. You see, we should get, here we go, Booleans of true and false. In this case, it's only false. It's good. Then what we want to do is set the attribute of aria expanded to be the opposite of what it currently is. So we'll take our nav button and we'll set the attribute of aria expanded to be the opposite of the expanded value. So bang. That will just convert true to false and false to true. And now when we click it, it should go back and forth between the two. So we'll have to open up our inspector, look at the button. And as you click it, you see that the aria expanded value goes back and forth, back and forth. So that's all the JavaScript we need to write. The rest is going to be done in CSS. So we'll go down to our responsive start. We'll go down to our 1000 pixel media query. And we'll say when aria expanded is equal to true, the unordered list that comes after it, this is a tilde selector, is sort of like a future sibling. So whatever unordered list comes in the future, it's the next one beside it. Then we are going to display grid on that. We'll set the max height to be 500 px. That's just for that's just so that we can actually transition it. And most importantly, we're going to transform the rotate value to be 0 degrees, or just 0. In that case, and that should actually show it. So hey, now when you click it, it goes whoop, 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 opens and closes itself. I'm not totally convinced on this actual flip out. We're going from rotate 90 degrees to rotate X 0 degrees. But what you can do is select the parent of the unordered list, which is the menu, and put a perspective of something like 800 px on it. Oh, actually, we already have a selector for the menu. Let's move that up here and get rid of this extra selector. And that should give us a bit more of a convincing, yeah, there we go. It's a bit more of a convincing go in and out value for us. Oh, so now I've got a bit of an issue here with the buttons actually still being there. So we rotated X, put a max height of 0. I'm probably forgetting something. Let me see here. Oh, there we go. Overflow hidden. There we go. That will hide its value there. So now when I click it, bloop, 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 change that perspective back to 800 pixels is a little bit much. And the only reason I have this max height and this max height here, if I take those off, let me show you what actually happens is it will just like animate itself in and out, but it won't actually slide up. And there's no way to slide up to height auto. So that's a little trick you can do in CSS to slide it up to height of 0. Good. I'm pretty happy with that. The other thing is that this X value here, we need to hide and show that. And if we look at the HTML values, we have spans inside of them with a class of open and a class of close. So we'll go right here and we'll say, copy this. When the aria expanded is equal to false, the close span inside of that will be displaying none. Good. That just hid the little X right here. And then when the aria expanded is equal to true, the open will be display inline block. So far, so good. Now you click it, and now the only problem is that now the little hamburger doesn't show itself. So I'm gonna do one more selector here. When it is open, the close button is going to be display none. And that should allow us to toggle between the two, or not close, the open, and this should be the close. There we go. So close it. There we go. It's opening and closing, switching the actual value. You could also put a width on this value here. You see how it's sort of moving, but I'll let you fiddle with the fixed width or making that display grid or whatever it is that you want to do to actually fix that value. So that's fixed. The menu, this is automatically responsive. Now our taco. So once we hit, I don't know what about right here. I'd say it's probably around 700 px, which is down here. We'll add it to our 700 pixel media query. So actually, sorry, that's right here. About our about, and we're just going to bring it down to one column. So grid template column 1FR, and that will just make everything one column. And once we hit that value, there we go. It makes itself one column instead of the two that we previously set it to. So I really like grid and responsive because almost always it's simply just redefining what the grid looks like. And then the children will just snap to where they look to, regardless of if you've done used FR and pixel values or if you've used template areas to figure that out. Then finally, our Instagrams at the end here, those are by default responsive as well because we use min-max and there's nothing need to be done there. So everything is looking totally responsive to me. Hopefully you learn a thing or two along that and you can implement some grid into your own value. See you in the next one.